The moment Kai Redbird saw the shepherd girl standing waist-deep in the San Pedro Creek, water streaming down her threadbare chemise, he knew his quiet life was over. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of what she said when their eyes met across 20 yards of morning mist. "You've seen me undressed. Now you must marry me." Most men would have laughed or fled. Kai did neither. He recognized a trap when he saw one, even when the trapper was shaking with cold and desperation. The question wasn't whether she'd planned this. It was why. If you want to see how far a desperate choice can take two people who don't belong anywhere, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind off the San Pedro carried the smell of sage and coming rain. Kai Redbird had been riding this trail for 3 years, ever since he'd left the reservation with nothing but his grandfather's rifle and a determination to disappear into country too sparse for questions. The creek ran shallow this time of year, cutting through scrubland that stretched toward mountains still crowned with last winter's snow. He knew every rock, every bend, every place the water pooled deep enough to water his horse. He didn't know there'd be a woman standing in it. She wasn't bathing, not exactly. Her dress lay in a careful pile on the bank, her shoes placed just so beside it. She stood in water that barely reached her waist, her arms crossed over her chest, her dark blonde hair plastered to her shoulders. She was shaking, whether from cold or nerves, Kai couldn't tell. What he could tell was that she'd been waiting. For him. Their eyes met across the creek. Hers were pale green, startling in a face burnished brown by sun and wind. She didn't look away. Didn't scream or duck beneath the water or do any of the things a respectable girl would do if caught by a strange man in her underclothes. She lifted her chin. "You've seen me undressed," she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her shoulders. "Now you must marry me." Kai's horse shifted beneath him, sensing his sudden tension. He kept his hands loose on the reins, his expression carefully neutral, a skill learned young and practiced often. Around white folks, showing nothing was safer than showing anything. "I don't think that's how it works," he said finally. "It is in this town." She took a step toward the bank, water sluicing off her thin chemise. The fabric clung to every curve, every angle. She had to know what she looked like, had to know what she was offering. "Everyone knows you ride past here Tuesday and Friday mornings. I made sure Mrs. Halloway saw me walking this direction. By noon, the whole valley will know you compromised me." "I didn't compromise anyone." Kai studied her face, looking for the calculation beneath the bravado. "You compromised yourself." Same result. She climbed out of the water, unself-conscious as a child, and reached for her dress. "You can marry me and give me a way out, or you can ride away and let them call me a whore. Either way, I'm not going back to that ranch." She pulled the dress over her head, the cotton immediately darkening where it touched her wet skin. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons. Kai noticed they were shaking harder now. Whatever courage had carried her into that creek was starting to falter. He should ride away, should let her face whatever consequences came from such a foolish, desperate gambit. But something in the set of her shoulders, in the way she kept her eyes on his, even as her fingers failed at simple fastenings, kept him in the saddle, watching. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eliza Hart." She got 3 buttons closed, gave up on the rest. "My father owns the Hart Ranch, 5 miles that way." She gestured vaguely south without looking away from his face. "Or he did, before he drank most of it and gambled the rest. Now someone else owns it. Someone who thinks he owns me too. And you figure an Apache husband is better than whoever your father sold you to?" The words came out harder than he'd intended, edged with old bitterness. But Eliza didn't flinch. "I figure a man who's been riding alone for 3 years, who camps in the foothills and brings his furs to town only when he needs supplies, who never looks at the girls when they smile at him. I figure that man might understand what it means to want to be left alone." She finally looked down, focused on her remaining buttons with fierce concentration. "I figure that man might be willing to let me work beside him instead of beneath him." Kai's jaw tightened. She'd been watching him, learning his patterns, his habits. This wasn't impulse, it was strategy. "You don't know anything about me," he said. "I know you're alive when you should be dead." She met his eyes again. "I've heard the stories, how the Apache got pushed off their land, how most ended up on reservations or in graves. But you're here, free. That means you're smart enough to survive and stubborn enough not to quit. That's more than I can say for any white man in this valley." A crow called from the cottonwoods upstream. Kai's horse snorted, shaking its head against the flies. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "I'm not marrying you," Kai said. Something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or relief. She nodded slowly. "Then I guess I should thank you for not making it worse." She bent to gather her shoes. "You could have... well, you didn't, so thank you for that much." She started walking, barefoot and dripping, back toward the town she'd just tried to escape. Kai watched her go, tracking the stubborn straightness of her spine, the way she didn't hurry or look back. Pride, he recognized, the kind that kept you upright when everything else wanted you on your knees. He knew that pride, had lived by it. "Miss Hart," she stopped but didn't turn. "This man your father promised you to. You know you're out here trying to trap strange men into marriage? He doesn't know anything about me." Now she did look back, and her smile was bitter as unripe persimmons. Just what he paid for, which apparently wasn't much. Father settled his gambling debts for $800 in clear title to the creek access. "I'm worth less than water rights." She walked away before he could respond, disappearing into the scrub oak that lined the creek. Kai sat his horse long after she'd gone, staring at the place where she'd stood in the water, so cold she'd been shaking, so desperate she'd manufactured a scandal. He should forget her, should ride up to his camp in the hills and check his trap lines and live the quiet, solitary life he'd built from the wreckage of everything that came before. Instead, he turned his horse toward town. The settlement of Mineral Springs didn't deserve the name. There were no minerals, and the springs had dried up years ago. What remained was a collection of weathered buildings slouching along a single street, anchored by a general store, a saloon, and a church that hadn't seen a regular preacher in months. The kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere better, except for those too poor, too stubborn, or too broken to keep moving. Kai tied his horse outside the store and went inside, moving with the careful deliberation that made people uncertain whether to challenge him or ignore him. Sam Yates, who ran the store, chose ignore. He took Kai's coins for coffee and cornmeal without comment, his eyes sliding away the way they always did. "Heard there was some excitement at the creek this morning," Sam said as he counted change. Kai waited. "Eliza Hart." Sam glanced toward the door, lowered his voice. "Mrs." Holloway saw her heading that direction, came back soaking wet. "Girl's got no sense. Her father's in the saloon right now, probably drinking away whatever he got for her." "He sold his daughter?" "Sold the ranch to Clint Barrow. Eliza was just part of the deal, thrown in like furniture." Sam shook his head. "Barrow's got a place up near Copper Ridge, runs cattle, runs men harder. He wanted the Hart water rights and didn't mind taking the girl to get them. Thomas Hart didn't mind letting her go." Kai gathered his supplies. "Where's Barrow now?" "Won't be here until end of month. Sent word he'd collect his property then." Sam's expression soured. "Property, like she's a horse." Kai carried his purchases outside. Across the street, a man stumbled out of the saloon, rail-thin, unshaven, clothes that had once been respectable now stained and rumpled. Thomas Hart. He squinted into the afternoon sun, swayed, and shuffled back inside. A father who'd sell his daughter for $800 and creek access. Kai loaded his supplies and rode out of town, heading not for his camp, but for the Hart Ranch. He found her with the sheep, a small flock, maybe 40 head, grazing on a hillside above a ranch house that was slowly surrendering to gravity and weather. Eliza sat on a boulder, a rifle across her lap, watching the horizon with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd learned early that danger didn't announce itself. She saw him when he was still a quarter-mile out, didn't move, didn't raise the rifle, just watched him approach with that same steady, measuring gaze she'd used at the creek. Kai stopped his horse 20 yards away. "You following me, Mr. Redbird?" she called. "Kai?" He swung down from the saddle. "And no. Came to tell you something." "Tell me I'm a fool?" "Already know that." She shifted the rifle slightly, not aiming, just adjusting. "Tell me I shamed myself for nothing. Know that too." "Tell you I talked to Sam Yates." Kai moved closer, slow and careful, the way he'd approach a spooked horse. About Clint Barrow. Her knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. He's got a reputation, Kai continued. Not a good one, especially with women who work for him. Work for him. Eliza's laugh was sharp as broken glass. That's one way to put it. End of the month? He's coming to collect you. I know. She looked at her sheep, counted them without seeming to, an automatic habit. I've got 3 weeks to figure out how to disappear, or how to make myself unmarriageable even to a man like Barrow. The creek trick didn't work. No. She finally looked at him directly. You were supposed to be the decent one, decent enough to do the right thing, not decent enough to refuse. Her smile was sad. I miscalculated. Kai studied the sheep, the failing ranch, the girl with her grandfather's rifle and her father's debts. He thought about the reservation, about the soldiers who'd come to move his people like livestock, about his grandfather saying some cages had bars, some had borders, some had bills of sale, about the look in Eliza's eyes when she'd said she was worth less than water rights. You know how to shoot that? He nodded at the rifle. Point and pull. How hard can it be? Hard enough to matter if you're trying to protect yourself. He held out his hand. Let me see it. She hesitated, then passed him the rifle. It was old, poorly maintained, the barrel fouled with rust. He checked the chamber, loaded, at least, and sighted down the barrel. See that bush? The one with the white flowers? Eliza squinted. Maybe. That's your problem right there. He handed back the rifle. You can't protect what you can't see. So I'm half blind and half trapped. Good to know. But she took the rifle, and when she looked at him, there was something new in her expression, something like possibility. Why are you here, Kai? He didn't have a good answer, didn't have any answer that made sense, even to himself. So he told her the truth. Because you stepped into that creek knowing I'd see you, knowing what it would cost, and you did it anyway. He met her eyes. That's either bravery or desperation. Either way, it deserves more than 3 weeks of waiting for a man like Barrow. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you learn to shoot. He pointed to the white-flowered bush. Start with that. Eliza raised the rifle, squinted, fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dust 20 feet left of target. The sheep scattered, bleeding indignation. She lowered the rifle, her jaw set against what might have been tears or might have been determination. Again, Kai said. She fired again, closer, but still wide. Again. This time she took her time, breathing like he showed her, squeezing instead of jerking. The bush shook as the bullet clipped its edge. Better. Kai gathered the reins of his horse. Tomorrow, same time, bring more ammunition. Why? The word came out raw. Why help me? He swung into the saddle, looked down at her. This white girl with her desperate gambit and her rusted rifle, standing in the wreckage of her father's failures. Because nobody helped me, he said. And I remember what that felt like. He rode away before she could respond, before he could question the impulse that had brought him here. Behind him, he heard her fire again, and again, and again, until the ammunition ran out and there was only the wind and the bleating of sheep and the echo of shots that might, eventually, hit their mark. The next morning, Eliza was waiting when he arrived. She'd brought bread, fresh baked, wrapped in clean cloth, and set it on the rock beside her like an offering. The rifle was clean now, the barrel oiled, the stock polished. She'd spent the night preparing, he realized, treating this like it mattered, maybe because it did. Brought breakfast, she said, casual as if they'd been meeting like this for years. Figured you might be hungry. Kai dismounted, eyed the bread. You trying to bribe me or poison me? If I wanted you dead, I'd have shot you yesterday when your back was turned. She broke the bread in half, offered him a piece. I'm a terrible shot, but at 10 feet even I couldn't miss. He took the bread. It was still warm, dense and dark with molasses. Good bread, the kind that took time and care. They ate in silence, watching the sheep drift across the hillside, the morning light turning the grass from shadow blue to gold. Your father know you're out here with me? Kai asked. My father doesn't know what day it is most mornings. No bitterness in her voice now, just fact. Long as the sheep come home and there's food on the table, he doesn't ask questions, doesn't care to know the answers. What about Barrow? He sent word yet? Letter came yesterday. She didn't look at him. He'll be here in 18 days. Expects me ready to travel. Says he's got a room prepared, a wardrobe purchased. Says he's looking forward to having a wife young enough to train properly. Kai's jaw tightened. Train? That's what he wrote. She picked up the rifle. So, teach me to shoot straight, Kai Redbird. Teach me to make myself too dangerous to train. They worked through the morning, stance, breathing, sight alignment, trigger squeeze. Eliza learned fast, her hands steadying as she began to understand the rifle's rhythm. By noon, she could hit the bush 3 times out of 5, and Kai found himself watching her face instead of her target, seeing the fierce concentration, the small smile when a shot landed true. Tell me about the reservation, she said during a break, passing him a canteen. Not much to tell. You left. That's something. He drank, handed back the canteen. The sun had climbed high, pressing heat down on the hillside. Below them, the ranch house shimmered in the glare. They put us on land nobody wanted, he said finally. Told us it was ours, then kept taking it back, piece by piece, every time they needed something. My grandfather saw the pattern. Told me some prisons have walls, some have treaties. Either way, you're not free. So you left. So I left. He met her eyes. And every day since, I've wondered if I'm any freer out here or just better at pretending. Eliza was quiet a long moment. Then, this morning, for the first time in months, I woke up and didn't feel like I was drowning. That's not freedom, maybe, but it's not drowning either. Something shifted between them then, a recognition, tentative and fragile. 2 people who understood what it meant to be trapped, each trying to teach the other how to break free. Again, Kai said, gesturing to the rifle. She fired until her shoulder ached and the sun fell toward the mountains. When she finally stopped, the white-flowered bush was shredded and her hands were steady. Tomorrow? She asked. Kai nodded. Tomorrow. He rode away watching her in his peripheral vision, standing on her hillside, rifle in hand, looking less like prey and more like something that might, given time and teaching, learn to hunt. The pattern continued. Every morning Kai rode to the Hart Ranch, and every morning Eliza was waiting. She brought bread, coffee, sometimes strips of dried mutton. He brought patience, instruction, and a growing awareness that he was involving himself in something that could turn dangerous fast. On the 4th day, she asked to see his camp. Why? Because if I have to run, I need to know where I'm running to. She finished cleaning the rifle, a ritual now, something she did without being asked. And because I want to see how you live, how you make it work. It's just a camp, nothing special. Show me anyway. So he did. His camp sat in a fold of the foothills, sheltered by cedar and pine, with a view down the valley and a spring that ran year-round. Simple setup. A canvas lean-to, a fire ring, supplies cached in a wooden box he'd traded for with pelts. The kind of camp a man could abandon in minutes if he needed to, leaving no trace he'd ever existed. Eliza walked the perimeter slowly, touching nothing, seeing everything. It's perfect, she said finally. Remote enough to be safe, close enough to reach in a night's hard ride. Good water, good cover. She looked at him. You could hide someone here, if you needed to. I'm not hiding you. I know. She sat on a flat rock near the fire ring. Because you're not that kind of man. You won't trap me in marriage, won't hide me like a criminal, won't make my problem yours. Eliza, it's fine. She cut him off, not unkind. I knew what I was asking for at the creek. Knew it was too much. You don't owe me anything, Kai, but these mornings, these lessons, they're more than anyone's given me in years. So thank you. I mean that. Kai stood awkward in his own camp, feeling the weight of her gratitude like a debt he hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. Below them, a hawk circled, riding thermals in the clear autumn air. You could stay, he heard himself say, not as a wife, as, he struggled for the word, as someone who needs a place. For a while. She looked up at him, surprise clear in her face. You mean that? Did he? He'd spent 3 years alone, building a life that required no one, trusted no one. Opening that solitude, even to someone as desperate as Eliza, felt like inviting trouble he'd worked hard to avoid. But he thought about Barrow, about men who treated women as property to be collected and trained. Thought about his grandfather's words. The people who survive aren't the strongest or the smartest. They're the ones who help each other. I mean it, he said, if you need it. Eliza stood, crossed to him, and did something unexpected. She She took his hand. Her palm was calloused from sheep and work, warm against his. She didn't hold on long, just squeezed once, firm and grateful. "I hope I don't need it," she said, "but it helps, knowing it's there." She let go, stepped back, and smiled. Not the bitter smile from the creek, but something softer, newer, something that looked almost like hope. They rode back to the ranch as the sun touched the mountains, turning the valley amber and rose. Neither spoke, but something had changed, some boundary crossed. When they parted at the edge of her property, Eliza turned in her saddle. "Kai? That thing you said about wondering if you're free or just better at pretending?" "Yeah." "Maybe freedom isn't a place. Maybe it's just finding someone who doesn't make you feel trapped." She rode away before he could answer, leaving him with words that followed him all the way back to his solitary camp, where he sat by the fire long into the night, thinking about cages and keys, and whether he just offered one or both. The visits became routine, and routine became something neither of them had planned on: companionship. Eliza no longer waited at the sheep pasture. She'd walk down to meet Kai at the creek, the same place where she'd tried to trap him into marriage, except now she came with easy conversation instead of desperation. She'd learned to read the weather in his silence, to know when he needed space and when he'd tolerate her questions. On the 7th morning, she brought coffee in a tin pot and 2 cups. "Figured we could sit a minute before we start," she said, pouring without asking if he wanted any. The steam rose between them, carrying the bittersweet smell of grounds boiled too long. "I've been thinking." "That sounds dangerous," she smiled. "About what you said. Freedom being a place or a feeling." She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing. Neither pulled away quickly. "I think you were both right and wrong." "That's so." "Freedom's a choice." She settled onto a rock, cradling her cup. "Every morning I choose to walk down here. Every morning you choose to show up. Nobody's making us. That's what makes it different from everything else." Kai drank his coffee, considering. She wasn't wrong. These mornings had become the part of his day he thought about when he should be thinking about trap lines and game trails. The part that made the solitude afterward feel less like peace and more like absence. "Barrow sent another letter," Eliza said, her tone shifting. "He'll be here in 12 days. Wants to know if I have any special requests for the household. What kind of curtains I prefer. What flowers I like." She stared into her coffee. "Like I'm decorating a prison cell." "You don't have to go." "Where else would I go?" She looked up at him. "Your camp's generous, but it's temporary. Winter's coming. You planning to share that lean-to when the snow gets deep? Planning to feed an extra mouth when game gets scarce?" "I've done it before." "No, you haven't." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You've survived alone. That's different than surviving together. And I won't be the reason you don't make it through winter." Kai set down his cup. "So what's your plan? Wait for Barrow to collect you like a package? Let him train you like a dog?" "My plan is to get good enough with this rifle that if he tries to train me, I can put a bullet somewhere that changes his mind." She stood, brushed off her skirt. "Speaking of which, I want to learn to shoot moving targets." "You can barely hit standing targets." "Then I'll practice until I can do both." She picked up the rifle, checked it with the competence he'd taught her. "You said yourself, I need to be able to protect what I can't see. Well, threats don't stand still." He spent the morning teaching her to track movement, to lead a target, to shoot where something would be instead of where it was. She missed more than she hit, but her jaw stayed set, her focus unwavering. When a rabbit bolted from the brush, and she dropped it clean at 40 yards, she turned to him with a grin so bright it made something in his chest tighten. "Did you see that?" "I saw. That's dinner tonight." She started toward the kill, then stopped. "You should stay. For dinner. I'll cook it properly. Not just roasted over a fire, but with potatoes and herbs. Real food. Your father is drunk by sundown every night. He won't notice, and if he does, he won't care." She met his eyes. "Please, let me thank you properly." Kai knew it was a mistake. Knew that every step closer to Eliza Hart was a step toward trouble he'd spent 3 years avoiding. But he nodded anyway because the alternative was riding back to his empty camp and pretending these mornings meant nothing. "I'll bring wine," she said, already planning. "There's a bottle hidden in the root cellar from before Father sold everything. We'll make it nice." That evening, Kai rode to the Hart Ranch house with fresh-caught trout and a sense he was crossing a line he couldn't uncross. The house looked worse up close. Sagging porch, broken shutters, paint peeling like sunburned skin. But light glowed warm through the windows, and when Eliza opened the door, she'd changed into a dress that was still worn but clean, her hair braided and pinned. "He's passed out already," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "We have the kitchen to ourselves." The room was simple. A wood stove, a scarred table, shelves mostly bare. But she'd set 2 places with mismatched plates and cups, and the rabbit was already browning in a Dutch oven, filling the air with rosemary and pepper. "Sit," she said, taking his trout. "I'll fry these up. Tell me something I don't know about you." "Like what?" "Like anything." She worked as she talked, her movements efficient. "I know you're Apache, you left the reservation, you live alone. But I don't know what you were before all that. What you wanted to be when you were young." Kai watched her cook, watched the way lamplight caught in her hair, the way she moved through the shabby kitchen like it was a palace because she'd decided it could be. "I wanted to be a healer," he said finally. "My grandfather was teaching me plants, remedies, how to set bones and treat fevers. He said healing was the most important skill because everyone needs it eventually." Eliza looked over her shoulder. "Why didn't you?" "Because healers need people to heal, and I didn't want to be around people anymore." She was quiet a moment, then plated the fish and brought everything to the table. The wine she poured was sweet and half-turned, but she served it like it was champagne. "To people we used to want to be," she said, raising her cup. "To people we might still become," Kai countered. They drank and ate, and the conversation flowed easier than it should have between a white girl facing an arranged marriage and an Apache man who'd chosen exile over reservation life. They talked about childhood, hers full of her mother's stories before she died, his full of his grandfather's wisdom before everything changed. They talked about the valley, about the way the aspens would turn gold in a few weeks, about whether the winter would be harsh or mild. They didn't talk about Barrow or the 12 days counting down between them. When the food was gone and the wine bottle empty, Eliza walked him to the door. The night had gone cold, stars sharp as broken glass overhead. "Thank you for coming," she said, "for treating this like it mattered." It did matter. Kai looked down at her, at the way she stood in the doorway, like she was afraid to let the evening end. "Does matter." She reached out, touched his arm. Just a brief contact, but he felt it like heat. "Kai, I need to tell you something." "What?" "That morning at the creek, I told you it was about escaping Barrow, about finding a way out." She took a breath. "That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Eliza, I'd been watching you for months, saw how you moved through town like you were invisible, like you'd learned to take up no space at all. Saw how you were kind to Sam Yates, even though he couldn't look you in the eye. Saw how you never took more than you needed, never made trouble." Her hand tightened on his arm. "I saw someone who was decent in a place where decent is rare, and I thought, if I have to belong to someone, let it be someone decent." Kai's throat tightened. "You don't belong to anyone." "I know that now." She smiled, sad and soft. "You taught me that. Every morning you showed up, you were teaching me that I could choose, that I didn't have to wait for someone to save me. I could learn to save myself." She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and chaste, then stepped back before he could respond. "Good night, Kai Redbird." She closed the door, leaving him standing in the cold dark, his face burning where her lips had touched, his heart doing something complicated and dangerous in his chest. He rode home knowing everything had changed. The next morning, she was waiting at the creek, but the easy companionship had shifted into something charged. They spoke less, worked more, and every accidental touch felt deliberate. When she handed him the rifle to demonstrate a technique, their fingers lingered. When he adjusted her stance, his hands on her shoulders felt like a promise neither of them had words for. 10 days, she said after they'd fired through all the ammunition. "I know. I could run, take a horse, head for California or Oregon, start over somewhere Barrow would never find me." "You could, but I'd be alone." She looked at him, "and I'm tired of being alone." Kai wanted to tell her he understood, wanted to say that solitude had been his salvation and his curse, that these weeks with her had reminded him what it felt like to be seen, to be known, but the words stuck in his throat, trapped behind 3 years of careful isolation. Instead, he showed her how to reload faster. That afternoon, Thomas Hart appeared at the pasture, swaying drunk even in daylight. Eliza stiffened when she saw him, her hand moving instinctively toward the rifle. "So it's true," Thomas slurred, squinting at Kai. "My daughter's been whoring herself to a red—" "Finish that sentence and I'll shoot you myself." Eliza's voice was ice. "Go home, father. Sleep it off. You think Barrow's going to want you after this? Think he's going to pay full price for a used—" The rifle came up smooth, the way Kai had taught her. Thomas stumbled backward, nearly fell. "Get out!" Each word was a bullet. "You sold me like livestock. You don't get to call me anything." Thomas retreated, muttering obscenities. When he was gone, Eliza lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. "I would have shot him," she said quietly. "If he'd said it, I would have pulled the trigger." "I know. Does that make me terrible?" Kai took the rifle from her, gentle. "Makes you someone who knows her worth. That's not terrible. That's survival." She turned into him then, her forehead against his chest, not crying but breathing hard like she'd run a long distance. His arms came up hesitant, then certain, holding her while she steadied herself. "I can't stay here," she whispered. "Not with him. Not with Barrow coming. I can't." "Then don't." She pulled back, looked up at him. "You mean it? Your camp. You'd let me stay there? Really stay? We'd have to prepare, get supplies, winterize the shelter. It wouldn't be easy." "I don't need easy." Her eyes were fierce. "I need free. Can you give me that?" Kai thought about his solitary life, his careful isolation, thought about what it would mean to share his space, his supplies, his survival with someone else. Thought about winter in the foothills, the cold, the snow, the long dark months. Then he thought about Eliza standing in the creek, shaking with cold and desperation. Thought about her learning to shoot, to track, to stand up to her father. Thought about her kiss on his cheek and the way her hand felt in his. "We leave in 8 days," he said, "before Barrow arrives. We take what we can carry and disappear." "Together?" "Together." She kissed him then, not on the cheek but full on the mouth, brief and fierce and tasting of coffee and courage. When she pulled away, she was smiling. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "Really seeing me." "You made it hard to look away." They spent the next week preparing in secret. Eliza gathered supplies, blankets, food, tools, hiding them in small caches she could retrieve when they left. Kai reinforced the camp shelter, built a second lean-to, hunted and smoked meat for winter stores. They met at the creek every morning, but now they planned instead of practiced, mapping routes and fallback positions like generals preparing for war. On the 6th day, Sam Yates pulled Kai aside in the store. "Heard Barrow's coming early," Sam said, keeping his voice low. "Got word he'll be here day after tomorrow. Something about wanting to surprise his bride." Kai's blood went cold. "You sure?" "Stage driver told me himself. Barrow's bringing 3 men with him. Says he wants to make sure there's no complications with the transfer. 3 men, armed, probably. And 2 days instead of 8. Sam, if anyone asks, you haven't seen me." "Kai, what are you at—" "You haven't seen me," Kai repeated, and left before Sam could press. He rode hard to the Hart Ranch, found Eliza at the pasture. One look at his face and she knew. "What happened?" "Barrow's coming in 2 days. We leave tonight." The color drained from her face. "Tonight? But we're not ready." "We're ready enough." He caught her hands. "Can you be at the creek by midnight? With whatever you can carry?" "My father will be drunk. Pack light, pack smart. Food, blankets, ammunition, nothing you can't run with." She nodded, her grip tightening on his. "Kai, if we do this, he'll come after us. Barrow doesn't seem like a man who lets go of what he thinks he owns." "I know. He might kill you. He might try." Kai met her eyes. "But I've survived worse than Clint Barrow, and I'll be damned if I let him take you." She pulled him down and kissed him hard, desperate. A kiss that tasted like goodbye to everything she'd known and hello to everything uncertain. "Midnight," she whispered against his mouth. "I'll be there." He rode away watching her in the fading light, standing straight and strong, no longer the desperate girl in the creek, but someone who'd chosen her own path, someone worth running for. That night Kai packed his camp with methodical precision. Everything essential went into saddlebags and packs: dried meat, coffee, ammunition, blankets, medical supplies his grandfather had taught him to gather. Everything else he scattered, making it look abandoned rather than relocated. If Barrow's men came looking, they'd find nothing to track. The moon rose full and bright, turning the valley silver. Kai rode down to the creek and waited, every nerve alert, listening for hoofbeats that would mean discovery, pursuit, the end of this fragile plan. At midnight, she came. Eliza appeared through the cottonwoods leading her father's best horse, saddlebags bulging, a bedroll tied behind her saddle. She'd changed into men's clothes, trousers, a heavy shirt, boots meant for riding. Her hair was braided tight, her face set with determination. "Everything I could carry," she said, breathless. "He never woke up. I left him a note saying I'd rather die free than live as property. He'll show it to Barrow." "Good. Let him know exactly why I left." She swung into the saddle with the ease of someone who'd been riding since childhood. "Where are we going?" "North, into the high country where men like Barrow don't go willingly." Kai turned his horse. "It'll be hard travel, cold camps, rough country. Last chance to change your mind." Eliza kneed her horse forward until she was beside him, close enough to touch. "I'm not changing my mind. Not about this. Not about you." They rode north into the star-filled darkness, leaving behind the valley and everything it represented. Fathers who sold daughters, men who bought them, towns that looked away from injustice as long as it was legal. Behind them, the creek ran silent and silver, witness to a desperate gambit that had become something neither of them expected. Something that looked almost like freedom. The country rose rough and wild around them. They followed game trails through scrub oak and juniper, climbed switchbacks where one misstep would mean a killing fall. Kai set a pace meant to eat distance, hard enough to outdistance pursuit, careful enough not to break the horses. Eliza kept up without complaint, her face set against exhaustion. At dawn, they stopped at a spring Kai knew, hidden in a fold of rock where the horses could drink and they could rest unseen. "We'll hole up here until dark," Kai said, dismounting. "Barrow will ride to your ranch this morning. By noon, he'll know you're gone. By evening, he'll have men searching." "How far behind us?" "If they're smart, not far. If they're stupid, they'll waste time searching the valley." He loosened his horse's cinch. "Either way, we keep moving. Can you ride another night?" "I can ride as long as it takes." She slid from her saddle, wincing as her legs took her weight. "Where exactly are we going?" "There's a canyon 2 days north. Box Canyon with one way in, good water, game, shelter. We can winter there if we have to." "If we have to?" She came to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell sage and sweat and fear on her. "You think we'll be running all winter?" "I think Barrow's pride is hurt. Men like him don't forgive that easy." Eliza was quiet a moment, staring at the rough country stretching north. Then she turned to him, and her eyes were clear. "I don't regret it. Even if we spend the whole winter running, even if he catches us, I don't regret choosing this. Choosing you." Kai touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "We're not getting caught. Promise?" "Promise." She leaned into his hand, eyes closing briefly. When they opened, there was something new there. Not just trust, but certainty. "Then teach me what I need to know. Not just shooting, but tracking, reading sign, moving quiet. Teach me to survive out here the way you do." So while the horses rested and the sun climbed toward noon, Kai taught her how to read broken grass and disturbed earth, how to move through brush without sound, how to find north by the sun and stars, how to make a fire that gave heat without smoke. She learned like her life depended on it, because it did. When darkness fell, they rode again, pushing deeper into country that grew rougher with every mile. The trail narrowed to a thread along cliff faces, broadened into meadows where elk grazed like ghosts in the moonlight. Once they heard wolves howling, distant and wild, and Eliza moved her horse closer to his. "They won't bother us," Kai said. "I know, but I like being close anyway." Near midnight, they crested a ridge and Kai reined in, pointing to the valley below. Even in darkness, Eliza could see it. A protected hollow with a stream running silver through its center, rock walls on 3 sides, timber thick enough for shelter and fuel. "That's it?" she asked. That's it. The canyon's another day past, but we can rest here. Build a fire. Sleep warm." They descended carefully, walking the horses through the dark until they reached the valley floor. The stream ran clear and cold, and cottonwoods grew thick along its banks. Kai built a fire in a ring of stones, small and smokeless, while Eliza tended the horses. When the fire was going, they sat close to its warmth, eating jerky and hard bread, too tired for conversation. But when Eliza leaned against his shoulder, Kai didn't move away. When she took his hand, he laced his fingers through hers. "Tell me something true," she said softly. "Something you've never told anyone." Kai watched the flames, thinking. "I'm afraid," he said finally, "all the time, that I'll make a mistake, that I'll lead you wrong, that Barrow will catch us and I won't be fast enough or strong enough to stop him. You're the bravest person I know. Bravery's just being more afraid of the alternative." He squeezed her hand. "Your turn. Something true." She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I knew from the first moment I saw you that you were different, that you'd either save me or destroy me. I didn't care which, as long as it meant I didn't have to belong to Barrow." She turned to face him. "Now I know you did both. You destroyed the girl who was willing to trap a stranger into marriage, and you saved the woman who learned she could save herself." Kai pulled her close, his arms around her, her head against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat, fast and strong, could smell creek water and wood smoke in her hair. "We're going to make it," he said. "Through winter, through whatever comes, we're going to make it. I believe you." They sat like that while the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, two people who'd chosen each other against every reasonable argument, learning what it meant to be free and together in a world that wanted them separate and caged. In the morning, they would ride for the canyon. But tonight, they had this, warmth and safety and each other, and the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. It was enough. For now, it was everything. Dawn broke cold and clear, frost silvering the grass around their camp. Kai woke first, as he always did, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle beside him before his eyes fully opened. But the valley was quiet except for the stream's murmur and Eliza's breathing, deep and even beside the dying fire. She'd fallen asleep sitting up, her head on his shoulder, and at some point in the night he'd shifted them both down until they lay wrapped in blankets, her back against his chest. Proper distance had seemed less important than warmth, than the simple human need for contact when the world was cold and uncertain. He eased away carefully, not wanting to wake her, and built up the fire. The horses stood hip-shot and patient, their breath steaming in the morning air. No signs of pursuit, no distant dust or sound of riders. They had time, but not much. Eliza stirred, blinked awake, and for a moment looked disoriented. Then her eyes found him, and she smiled, small and private, the kind of smile that made his chest tight. "Morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Morning, we should move soon." "I know." But she didn't move, just sat wrapped in the blanket, watching him work. "Kai, last night when you held me, we were cold." "We were, but that's not why you did it." She stood, folded the blanket with careful precision. "And it's not why I let you." He didn't have an answer for that, so he focused on saddling the horses, on the familiar routine of preparation. But when she came to check her cinch, she put her hand over his. "I'm not asking for promises," she said quietly. "I know we're running, I know everything's uncertain, but I need you to know what's happening between us. It's not just gratitude. It's not just survival." "Eliza, it's real, Kai. Whatever it is, it's real." She moved away before he could respond, leaving him standing with his hands on the saddle leather, heart hammering against his ribs. Real. The word echoed through him like a stone dropped in deep water, sending ripples through everything he thought he understood about himself, about the solitary life he'd chosen. They rode north through country that grew wilder with each mile. The trail climbed through stands of aspen already turning gold, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. Twice Kai stopped to study the ground, reading sign that Eliza couldn't yet see. "Elk," he said at one point, indicating tracks pressed into soft earth. 3, maybe 4, passed through yesterday." "How do you know yesterday?" "The edges are still sharp. Rain or wind would have softened them." He nudged his horse forward. You have to learn to read time in the land. Everything tells a story if you know how to listen. She was a quick study, asking questions that showed she was thinking, not just memorizing. By midday, she could spot disturbed ground, identify deer tracks from elk, read the age of scat by its color and consistency. Kai found himself teaching her the way his grandfather had taught him, with patience and stories, making lessons into something alive rather than abstract. Your grandfather, Eliza said, as they watered the horses at a spring. Would he have approved of this? Of us? Kai considered. He would have said I was a fool for getting involved with a white woman, that it could only end badly. And he also would have said that a man who lives only for himself dies alone and unmourned, that the measure of a life is who you help, not what you avoid. So, which is it? Am I trouble to avoid or someone worth helping? He looked at her standing in dappled sunlight, her borrowed clothes dusty from travel, her hair coming loose from its braid, her hands competent on the horse's reins. Not the desperate girl from the creek anymore, but not yet whoever she was becoming. Something in between, something emerging. You're both, he said honestly, and I chose to help anyway. They reached the canyon as the sun touched the western peaks. It opened before them like a secret, high walls of red stone, a floor thick with grass and scattered pine, a creek running through its heart. The entrance was narrow enough that 2 riders would have to go single file, and Kai had hidden it well over the years, piling brush and deadfall to make it look impassable. It's perfect, Eliza breathed, taking in the protected space. How did you find it? Hunting elk 3 winters ago. Followed them in and found this. He dismounted, began clearing the entrance. It's why I've survived out here. Places like this, where you can see anyone coming long before they see you. They led the horses through the narrow gap and into the canyon proper. The walls rose 100 feet on 3 sides, the 4th blocked by a rock fall that would take hours to climb. Water, shelter, grass for the horses, deadfall for firewood, everything they needed. We'll camp at the far end, Kai said, pointing, against the wall. Fire won't be visible from outside, and we'll have warning if anyone finds the entrance. They worked through the afternoon setting up a proper camp. Kai showed Eliza how to build a shelter using deadfall and pine boughs, how to create a fire pit that would burn hot and smokeless, how to set simple alarms using rocks and sticks that would clatter if disturbed. She worked without complaint, her hands learning the tasks even when her muscles protested. By evening, they had something that looked almost permanent, a lean-to large enough for 2, a fire ring, supplies organized and protected. Not comfort, but security. Not home, but refuge. Tomorrow we hunt, Kai said as they ate. We need meat to smoke, enough to last if we have to winter here. You really think we'll be here that long? I think we prepare for it. Hope we don't need it. He fed another stick to the fire. But winter in these mountains comes hard and stays late. If we're not ready, the crack of a rifle shot split the air, echoing off the canyon walls. They both froze. Another shot, closer. Then voices, rough and carrying in the still evening air. Tracks go in here somewhere, fresh ones. You sure it's them? 2 horses, one bigger than the other. Hart's daughter took her father's bay. How many people you know riding double through this country? Kai's hand found Eliza's in the darkness, squeezed once. Her eyes were wide but steady. He put a finger to his lips, then gestured toward the shelter. She nodded, understanding without words. They moved silent as shadows, gathering the rifles, the ammunition, anything that would show recent occupation. The fire Kai smothered with dirt, burying the coals deep. 60 seconds and the camp looked abandoned, just another spot where travelers might have stopped weeks or months ago. The voices grew closer. 3 men, maybe 4, arguing about whether to push through the brush or wait until morning. Kai pulled Eliza into the deepest shadow against the canyon wall, behind a jumble of rocks that formed a natural blind. From here they could see the entrance, but wouldn't be seen unless someone came directly to them. Barrow said bring her back unharmed, one voice said. Didn't say nothing about the Apache. Barrow said bring her back. How we do it's our business. A different voice, harder. Red bastard steals a white woman, he gets what's coming. Eliza's hand tightened on Kai's arm. He could feel her anger, her fear, could feel his own rage building at the casual way they discussed his death. But anger was a luxury they couldn't afford. Survival meant stillness, silence, patience. The voices faded as the men moved past the canyon entrance, arguing about whether the tracks continued or if their quarry had doubled back. Kai and Eliza waited, hardly breathing, while the sounds receded into the distance. An hour passed. 2. The moon rose, flooding the canyon with silver light that made hiding harder. Still they waited. Finally, Kai whispered, "They'll camp for the night. Come back at first light to search properly." "How many?" "3 that I heard. Maybe more watching the horses." He shifted, his muscles cramping from stillness. "We can't stay here. They know the tracks lead this direction. By tomorrow, they'll find the entrance." "Where do we go?" "Higher. There's a game trail up the north wall. Leads to a plateau. Rough going, but horses can make it if we're careful." He looked at her in the moonlight. "It'll be cold up there. Exposed. But they won't follow, not in darkness." "Then we go now." They gathered their supplies with silent efficiency, every movement calculated to make no sound. The horses sensed the tension, shifting nervously as Kai and Eliza led them toward the north wall where the trail began its steep ascent. It was barely a trail, more a suggestion of passage that deer and elk used, winding up through broken rock and stunted pine. The horses balked at first, but Kai's gelding trusted him enough to try, and Eliza's bay followed. They climbed in darkness broken only by moonlight, each step a calculated risk, hooves scraping on stone, leather creaking, breath harsh in the thin air. Halfway up, Eliza's horse stumbled. She grabbed for the saddle horn as the bay scrambled for purchase, rocks clattering down the slope. The sound was thunder in the quiet night. "Steady," Kai said, voice low and calm. "Let him find his feet." The bay steadied, shaking. Below them, far below now, voices erupted. "What was that?" "Rockfall. North side. Could be them." "Could be a goddamn deer. You want to climb that in the dark?" A pause. Then, "We wait. First light, we go up." Kai and Eliza kept climbing. The trail grew steeper, the air colder. Once Kai's gelding lost footing entirely, sliding backward before catching himself. Once Eliza had to dismount and lead her horse across a stretch where the trail crumbled into nothing, trusting her feet to find purchase where there seemed to be none. They reached the top as the stars began to fade. The plateau stretched before them, bare rock and scrub grass, windswept and desolate, with no shelter except what the land's contours provided. But it was high ground, defensible, and the trail they'd climbed was too steep for men to rush without warning. "We rest here," Kai said. "They come. We'll see them long before they reach us." They found a depression in the rock that blocked the wind and collapsed there, too exhausted even to build a fire. Eliza leaned against Kai, shivering despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This is my fault. If I hadn't—" "Don't." He pulled her closer. "You didn't ask Barrow to buy you. Didn't ask your father to sell you. You asked to be free. There's no fault in that. But you're in danger because of me. I'm in danger because I chose to be. Because the alternative was letting you face this alone." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "I don't regret it, Eliza. Not any of it." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, tasting of fear and determination and something deeper that neither of them had words for. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait for sunrise. See if they're stupid enough to come up that trail." He checked his rifle, counted ammunition. "If they are, we make them regret it. And if they wait us out, then we find another way down. But my guess is Barrow's men aren't patient. They're used to force working. When it doesn't, they get frustrated, make mistakes." Dawn came slow and cold, light creeping across the plateau like something reluctant. From their vantage point, they could see the canyon below, the narrow entrance, the trail they'd climbed in darkness. And they could see the 3 men emerging from the trees, studying the ground, pointing up toward the plateau. One was older, weathered, wearing a deputized badge that gave him false authority. The other 2 were younger, harder, the kind of men who hired out their violence and called it work. They stood at the base of the trail, looking up, arguing. The older one started climbing. "Fools," Kai muttered. He positioned himself behind a rock outcrop, rifle ready, and waited. Eliza crouched beside him, her own rifle loaded, her face pale but determined. The man climbed steadily. making good progress on the lower sections. But as the trail steepened, he slowed, grabbing for handholds, breathing hard in the thin air. He was 50 yards below them when Kai stood up, rifle pointed downward. "That's far enough," Kai called. The man froze, looked up. Recognition and calculation crossed his face in quick succession. "You Redbird?" "I am." "Got a warrant for your arrest. Kidnapping, theft, assault on Thomas Hart. Hart's a drunk and a liar. His daughter left of her own choice." "That's not what Clint Barrow says. He's got a legal claim on her. You're interfering with that claim." The man shifted, his hand moving toward his sidearm. "Touch that gun and you die on this trail," Kai said, calm as discussing weather. "You can't shoot all three of us." "No, but I can shoot you, and your friends down there will watch you fall. Then they'll have to decide if this job's worth dying for." The man considered, his hand hovering. Below, the other two watched, waiting for his lead. "Miss Hart," the man called. "You up there?" Eliza stood beside Kai, rifle in her hands. "I'm here. Mr. Barrow sent us to bring you home. Says he's willing to overlook this foolishness if you come back now." "I don't have a home anymore. My father sold it." Her voice rang clear across the rocks. "And I'm not foolish. I'm free. Tell Barrow he can't buy what's not for sale." "Girl, you don't understand what you're saying. Barrow's a powerful man. He can make life real hard for you and your Apache friend here." "Then let him try." She raised her rifle slightly. "From down there, where we can see him coming." The standoff held, everyone balanced on the knife edge of violence. Then the older man sighed, shook his head. "Your funeral," he said, and started back down. They watched him descend, watched the three men confer at the base of the trail. One wanted to try again, gesturing angrily upward. The older man shook his head, pointed back toward the valley. Eventually they mounted and rode away, but Kai knew it wasn't over. "They'll report back to Barrow," he said. "Tell him where we are." "Will he come himself?" "Men like Barrow don't do their own dirty work. But he'll send more men, better men, and they won't try to climb in daylight." Eliza lowered her rifle, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "How long do we have?" "A week, maybe. Depends how fast they can gather a crew willing to come after us." He pulled her close, felt her trembling. "We use that time to get deeper into the high country, make them work for every mile." "Kai, we can't run forever." "We don't have to run forever, just until winter." He looked at the peaks rising north and east, already capped with snow. "Another month and these mountains become impassable. Barrow's men won't follow us through a winter storm. Nobody would." "So we survive until winter. Then what?" "Then we survive winter. And in spring we figure out what comes next." She pulled back, searched his face. "You're talking about months. Maybe longer. Living up here, hiding, running. Is that really freedom? Is living in Barrow's house freedom? Being trained like a dog, owned like property?" He cupped her face in his hands. "This isn't the freedom I wanted for you. But it's the freedom we have, and I'll take hard freedom over comfortable slavery any day." "What if I said I wanted to fight instead of run? Go back to town, make a stand, force Barrow to face justice?" "I'd say you're braver than you are smart. And I'd say justice doesn't work the same for everyone." He let his hands drop. "But if that's what you want, I'll stand with you." Eliza was quiet a long time, looking out over the wild country stretching in all directions, beautiful and harsh and utterly indifferent to human struggles. "No," she said finally, "you're right. We run, we survive, and we do it together." They spent the day watching the canyon, making sure the men didn't return. When evening came and the plateau was still empty, they risked a small fire and ate the last of their bread with strips of dried venison. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, frost forming on the rocks, their breath steaming in the firelight. "Tell me about the reservation," Eliza said. "I know you left, but what was it like before, when your grandfather was alive?" Kai stared into the fire, weighing how much to share, how much old pain to invite into this new thing growing between them. "It was a slow death," he said finally. "They took our land, our way of life, our freedom to move, said they'd provide for us, but the provisions came late or not at all. My grandfather watched our people starve on land that used to feed us. Watched children die of diseases that wouldn't have touched us if we'd been free to move, to hunt, to live as we'd always lived. How did he die? Pneumonia. The winter I was 17, we had no medicine, no doctor who'd come to the reservation. He told me the night before he died that I should leave, that I was young enough, smart enough to make it on my own, that staying would kill me slower but just as sure. So you left. So I left, walked away in the middle of winter with his rifle and nothing else. Haven't been back since. Eliza reached for his hand. Do you regret it, leaving your people? Every day. And not at all. He turned to her. That's what freedom costs, Eliza. You don't get to keep everything. You have to choose what you'll fight for, what you'll surrender, what matters more than survival itself. I chose to live free, even if it meant living alone. You chose the same thing when you walked away from your father's ranch. Except I'm not alone. She leaned against him. Neither of us is anymore. They sat watching the fire burn low, wrapped in blankets and each other's warmth, while the stars wheeled overhead and the wind sang through the rocks. Tomorrow they'd move deeper into the mountains, putting more distance between themselves and the men who hunted them. But tonight they had this, heat and safety, and the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd chosen it together. Near midnight, Eliza fell asleep with her head on Kai's shoulder. He held her carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility, and something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. He'd spent 3 years teaching himself not to need anyone, not to care, not to risk the kind of connection that could be taken away. Now here he was, holding a woman who'd trapped him not with manipulation, but with her courage to choose freedom over safety, her determination to learn instead of surrender, her willingness to see him as something more than the color of his skin or the history of his people. She'd asked what freedom was. Maybe it was this, the choice to care despite the cost, to build something with someone even when the world wanted to tear it apart. The fire died to embers. Kai added no more wood, letting the darkness claim them. In the morning, they'd run again, but for now they rested, two people learning what it meant to survive not alone but together, in a world that wanted them separate and afraid. Above them, a shooting star traced silver across the sky and disappeared. Kai made no wish. He'd learned long ago that wishing changed nothing, but holding Eliza close, feeling her breath slow and steady against his chest, he thought maybe there was something more powerful than wishes. Maybe there was choosing and staying and refusing to let go even when letting go would be easier. Maybe that was enough. The cold woke Kai before dawn, seeping through blankets and into bones. Beside him, Eliza slept curled tight against the chill, her face peaceful in a way it never was during waking hours. He eased out from under the blankets and stood, joints protesting, breath clouding white in the pre-dawn darkness. The plateau stretched empty around them, frost glittering like scattered diamonds in the starlight, beautiful and unforgiving. They couldn't stay here. Too exposed, too cold, no shelter worth the name. They needed to move deeper into the mountains, find a place they could defend, and survive the winter that was coming faster than either of them wanted to admit. He rebuilt the fire, small and quick, just enough to boil coffee. The smell brought Eliza awake, blinking against the cold. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice rough. "Early. We should move before the sun's high enough to make us visible from below." She sat up, wincing. "Everything hurts." "It will for a while. Your body's not used to this kind of travel." He handed her coffee in a tin cup. "We'll take it slower today. Let the horses rest more." "Where are we going?" "There's a valley about 10 miles north. Sheltered, water year-round, enough timber to build something more permanent than a lean-to." He drank his own coffee, bitter and strong. "We can winter there if we need to." "You keep saying if. You don't think we'll need to?" Kai looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I think Barrow's men will give up long before winter sets in hard. But I also think Barrow himself might not. Men like him, it's not about the money or even about you anymore. It's about being defied, about losing something he thought he owned. So we're not just running from hired guns. We're running from his pride. His rage, his need to prove he can take what he wants." Kai set down his cup. That kind of anger doesn't quit easy. They broke camp as the first light touched the eastern peaks. packing with the efficiency of people who'd learned to move fast. The descent from the plateau was slower than the climb had been, the horses picking their way carefully down the rocky trail. When they reached level ground, Kai didn't head back toward the canyon. Instead, he turned north, following a creek that cut through stands of pine and aspen. The country opened before them in waves of wilderness. Meadows where elk grazed in the morning mist, forests so thick the sunlight barely reached the ground, ridges that climbed toward peaks already white with early snow. It was country that made you feel small, that reminded you how little human concerns mattered to the vast indifference of stone and sky. By midday, they'd covered 6 miles, and Eliza was swaying in the saddle, exhausted despite her determination not to show it. Kai called a halt near a spring where the water pooled clear and cold. "Rest," he said. "I'm going to scout ahead." "I can come with you." "You can barely sit your horse. Rest. I'll be back in an hour." He left her there with the rifles and the horses, trusting her to stay alert, and moved through the forest on foot. The skills his grandfather had taught him came back easy, reading the land, moving silent, seeing what didn't belong. He found elk sign, deer trails, the scratch marks where a bear had sharpened its claws on a pine trunk. But no human sign, no tracks, no disturbed ground, no sense of being watched. They were alone out here, at least for now. He circled back to find Eliza dozing against a tree, her rifle across her lap, her face slack with exhaustion. She jerked awake when he approached, the rifle coming up before she recognized him. "Easy," he said. "Just me." "Sorry, I wasn't sleeping, just—" "You were sleeping. It's fine." He crouched beside her. "We're clear for now. No sign of anyone following." Relief washed over her face. "So, we're safe?" "For now, but we keep moving. Another 4 miles and we'll reach the valley I told you about." Those 4 miles took until evening, the horses moving slow, both riders too tired for conversation. When the valley finally opened before them, Eliza actually gasped. It was everything Kai had promised. A protected bowl maybe 2 miles across, ringed by ridges thick with pine and aspen. A creek ran through its center, fed by springs high in the surrounding hills. The grass grew thick despite the season, and a beaver pond reflected the evening sky like polished silver. At the far end, tucked against the eastern ridge, stood the ruins of an old trapper's cabin. "Someone lived here?" Eliza asked. "Long time ago, before my time." Kai led them toward the cabin. "It's mostly fallen in, but the foundation's good. The chimney's still standing. We can rebuild it." The cabin was more ruin than structure. 3 walls standing, the 4th collapsed, the roof gone entirely except for a few blackened beams. But the stone chimney rose solid, and the foundation showed the kind of craftsmanship that outlasted the men who'd laid it. "We can make this work," Eliza said, already seeing possibility where there was only wreckage. "Rebuild the walls, put up a roof. It won't be beautiful, but it'll keep us alive. We'd need to work fast. Snow could come any time now." Kai studied the sky, reading weather in the clouds. 2 weeks, maybe 3 before the storms start. After that, we're trapped here until spring. Then we'd better get started. They made camp in the ruins that night, using the standing walls for shelter, the chimney for their fire. Exhaustion pulled them under fast, but before sleep claimed her completely, Eliza reached for Kai's hand in the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For this. For not giving up on me when it would have been easier to let me face Barrow alone. For teaching me to shoot, to track, to survive. For being here." Kai squeezed her hand, felt the calluses forming on her palms from hard work and harder travel. "You would have survived without me. Maybe, but I wouldn't have lived. There's a difference." She fell asleep still holding his hand, and Kai lay awake listening to the creek and the wind and the sounds of a valley settling into night. Tomorrow, they'd start building, start preparing for a winter that would test everything they'd learned about survival and each other. But tonight they had shelter, however ruined, and safety, however temporary. It was more than they'd had a week ago, more than either of them had dared to hope for. Morning brought the work. They started with the collapsed wall, clearing debris, salvaging logs that were still sound. Kai showed Eliza how to notch logs for stacking, how to think mud and moss for chinking, how to build straight and true so the structure would hold against wind and snow. She learned with her hands, making mistakes and fixing them, her muscles remembering what her mind was still learning. By the third day, the wall was half rebuilt. By the fifth, it stood complete, and they'd started on the roof. Kai cut pine poles for rafters while Eliza gathered cedar bark for shingles, and together they raised a framework that would shed rain and snow. They fell into a rhythm: work from first light until noon, hunt or gather in the afternoon, return to building until dark made it impossible to see. At night they ate what they'd caught or gathered, talked little but sat close, both too tired for anything but the comfort of proximity. On the eighth day, while Kai was cutting rafters on the ridge above the cabin, he heard hoofbeats. He froze, listening. Multiple horses moving fast coming from the south. He dropped the axe and ran for the cabin, covering the distance in minutes that felt like hours. "Eliza," he called as he burst into the clearing. "Riders coming. We need to hide." She emerged from the cabin, saw his face, and didn't waste time with questions. They gathered the rifles and what supplies they could carry and ran for the ridge on the valley's north side. From there, hidden in a stand of pine, they watched 5 men ride into the clearing below. Clint Barrow rode at the center, a big man, barrel-chested, with a face that showed he was used to getting what he wanted. 2 men flanked him, hard-looking and heavily armed. Behind them rode the older man from the plateau, and another Kai didn't recognize. They circled the cabin, studying the fresh work, the rebuilt wall, the half-finished roof. "Recent work," Barrow said, his voice carrying up the slope. "They're still here, somewhere close." "Could be anywhere in these mountains," one of the gunmen said. "Then we make them come to us." Barrow dismounted, walked to the cabin, and pulled a torch from his saddlebag. "Burn it, burn everything. They'll have to show themselves when their shelter's gone." Beside Kai, Eliza made a small sound of protest. He put a hand on her arm, shook his head. The cabin didn't matter. Only survival mattered. They watched as Barrow's men set fire to the cabin, to the walls they'd rebuilt, to the roof they'd half finished. The flames caught fast, fed by dry timber, and within minutes the structure was an inferno. The men stood watching, waiting for Kai and Eliza to appear, to try to save what they'd built. "They're not coming," the older man said finally. "They saw us coming, ran for the hills. Then we tracked them." Barrow's face was hard in the firelight. "They can't have gone far. Not with horses, not in this country." "Mr. Barrow, with respect, we've been tracking them for over a week. They know this country better than we do. We could spend all winter chasing shadows while they slip away." "I don't pay you to give up." "You pay me to bring back your property, but that girl's made it clear she'd rather die than come back to you. And the Apache, he's not going to let her go without a fight." The older man gestured to the burning cabin. "This here? This is just going to make them more determined." Barrow's jaw worked. "You suggesting I quit? Let them make a fool of me?" "I'm suggesting you cut your losses. Girl's not worth dying over, and these mountains will kill us all if we're not careful." The 2 gunmen exchanged glances, clearly agreeing but unwilling to say it. Barrow stood rigid, staring at the flames, and for a moment Kai thought he might order them to keep searching, but finally he turned, swung into his saddle. "We leave at first light, search the valley one more time. If we don't find them by noon, we head back." They made camp near the burning cabin, posted guards, settled in for the night. From the ridge, Kai and Eliza watched the flames die to embers, watched their shelter, their hope of surviving winter, reduced to ash and charred timber. "What do we do now?" Eliza whispered. "We wait until they leave, then we decide." "Decide what?" "Whether to freeze to death or starve. Whether to rebuild or move on." He looked at her in the moonlight. "That cabin's gone, but the valley's still here. The water, the shelter of the ridges, the game. We can build again if we need to." "In time for winter?" "If we work fast. If we're lucky." He didn't mention all the ways luck could fail them. Early snow, scarce game, injury, sickness. Didn't mention that rebuilding in 2 weeks what had taken them 8 days the first time was probably impossible. She must have heard what he didn't say because she leaned against him, her body trembling. Not from cold, he realized, but from something breaking inside her. "I'm so tired of running," she said. "So tired of being afraid. Of looking over my shoulder, of building things just to watch them burn." "I know." Do you really?" She pulled away, looked at him with eyes that reflected firelight from below. You've been running for 3 years. How much longer can you keep doing this? How much longer can we? Kai didn't have an answer, or rather, he had the answer his grandfather would have given. As long as it takes. As long as you're breathing. As long as surrender means death. But that answer felt hollow now, watching everything they'd built turn to ash, feeling Eliza's exhaustion like it was his own. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying maybe we stop running. Maybe we go back to town, face Barrow, make him answer for what he's done. Eliza, there's no law that will protect you against a man like Barrow, no justice for a girl who ran away from a legal sale. Then we make our own justice. That's called murder, and they'll hang us both for it. She laughed, bitter. So our choices are freeze, starve, or hang. Those are terrible choices, Kai. They're the only ones we have. They were quiet a long moment, watching the embers glow in the darkness below. Then Eliza stood, picked up her rifle. I'm going down there, she said. What? No. I'm going to walk into that camp and tell Barrow to his face that I'm not his property. That he can't buy me, can't own me, can't make me into something I'm not. She met Kai's eyes. And if he tries to take me by force, I'm going to shoot him. They'll kill you. Maybe. But at least I'll die making my own choice instead of letting other people make it for me. She started down the slope. Kai caught her arm. Wait. I'm done waiting. I'm done hiding. She pulled free. You can come with me or stay here, but I'm going. She meant it. He could see it in her face, in the set of her shoulders, in the way she held the rifle like she knew exactly what she was going to do with it. This wasn't desperation or recklessness. This was decision, final and certain. If you go down there, I go with you, Kai said. But not like this, not angry and scared and half crazy from exhaustion. Then how? Smart, careful, with a plan that gives us a chance of surviving. He thought fast, weighing options. Barrow's got 5 men. We're 2, but we have the high ground. We know this valley, and they're in the open with a fire making them visible. You want to attack them? I want to even the odds. He studied the camp below. We take out their horses first. Without mounts, they're stuck here, and we can pick them off or wait them out. That's still murder. No, that's survival. Big difference. He checked his rifle. We don't kill unless we have to, but we make it clear that coming after us costs more than we're worth. Eliza was quiet, thinking. Then she nodded. What do you need me to do? They spent an hour planning, using the moonlight to map the camp, identify where the horses were picketed, where the men slept, where the guards stood watch. Kai had learned patience from hunting, had learned that success came not from rushing, but from waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came near midnight when the guards changed, when attention shifted and eyes adjusted to new positions. Kai moved first, ghost silent down the slope, circling wide to come at the horses from the north. Eliza stayed on the ridge, rifle ready, watching for any sign of alarm. The horses stirred as Kai approached, but he spoke soft words his grandfather had taught him, words that calmed animals even in their own language. He cut the picket line with 3 quick strokes of his knife. The horses scattered, not running but drifting away into the darkness, confused but not panicked. By the time the guards noticed, the animals were gone, dissolved into the night. Shouts erupted from the camp. Men scrambled for weapons, for torches, trying to understand what had happened. In the confusion, Kai melted back into the darkness, circling toward where Eliza waited. A shot cracked out, one of Barrow's men firing at shadows. Then another, wild and undisciplined. Kai heard Barrow yelling, trying to restore order, but fear had taken hold. They were stranded in hostile country with no horses, no way to pursue or escape, and an enemy they couldn't see. Kai reached the ridge, found Eliza exactly where he'd left her. Now we wait, he said. Let them think about what it means to be hunted instead of hunting. They watched as Barrow's men built up the fire, huddled close to its light, jumping at every sound. Near dawn, the older man approached Barrow, and even from the ridge they could hear the argument. This is madness. We're sitting ducks out here. Then we track them on foot. Track who? Ghosts? They could be anywhere. They could pick us off one by one, and we'd never see them coming. The older man shook his head. I signed on to bring back a runaway girl, Not to die in these mountains. I'm walking out come morning. You want to stay? That's your choice. You walk out. You don't get paid. I walk out. I stay alive. I'll take alive over paid. By sunrise, 3 of the 5 men had decided to leave. They gathered what supplies they could carry and started south, walking, leaving Barrow and 1 loyal gunman in the ruined valley. From the ridge, Kai and Eliza watched them go. What do we do about the other 2? Eliza asked. We wait, see what they decide. What Barrow decided was stubbornness. He and his remaining man stayed by the burned cabin, rationing supplies, clearly hoping Kai and Eliza would show themselves. 2 days passed. 3. The weather turned cold. Frost every morning, the smell of snow in the air. On the 4th day, Kai and Eliza descended from the ridge. They approached openly, rifles ready, but not aimed, walking into the clearing where Barrow waited. He stood when he saw them, his hand going to his pistol but not drawing it. His man was slower, warier, his gun already out. Miss Hart, Barrow said, his voice controlled despite the rage in his eyes. You've caused me considerable trouble. You've caused yourself trouble, Eliza replied, by thinking you could buy a person like you'd buy cattle. I paid good money for you, $800 and clear water rights. That makes you mine, legally and properly. The law that says that is wrong, and I don't care what paper you think gives you the right to own me. No one owns me. Not you, not my father, not any man. Barrow's jaw tightened. You're coming back with me. You can walk or be carried, but you're coming. No, Kai said, stepping forward. She's not. This doesn't concern you, Apache. Everything about her concerns me now. Barrow studied him, reassessing. You're willing to die for a white woman you barely know? I'm willing to stand here and defend her right to choose her own life. You're the one who has to decide if that's worth dying over. The gunman shifted, bringing his pistol up. Eliza's rifle moved smooth and certain, centering on his chest. Don't, she said quietly. The man froze, seeing death in her eyes, in the steadiness of her hands. This wasn't the frightened girl who'd stood in the creek weeks ago. This was someone who'd learned to survive, who'd killed game to eat, who'd faced down hired guns on a mountain trail. Someone who would pull the trigger without hesitation. Mr. Barrow, the gunman said slowly, maybe we should reconsider. We're not reconsidering anything. But Barrow's hand had moved away from his pistol. He was smart enough to know when the odds had turned against him. Then here's what's going to happen, Kai said. You're going to walk out of this valley. You're going to tell everyone that Eliza Hart is dead, fell from a cliff, drowned in a river, whatever story you want, and you're going to leave us alone. And if I don't? Then we kill you both, and no one ever knows what happened to Clint Barrow. You disappear like smoke, and in a year no one remembers your name. It was a bluff, mostly. Kai didn't want to kill anyone, but Barrow didn't know that, and the uncertainty was enough. You can't hide in these mountains forever, Barrow said. Winter's coming. You'll freeze or starve, and then all this will have been for nothing. Maybe, Eliza said, but we'll freeze or starve free. That's worth more than all your money and all your legal papers combined. Barrow stared at her a long moment. Then he turned to his man. Get our gear. We're leaving. Sir, we can't just... We're leaving. That's an order. They gathered what little they had and walked out of the valley, heading south toward civilization and defeat. Kai and Eliza watched them go, rifles ready until they disappeared beyond the southern ridge. When they were finally alone, Eliza lowered her rifle and started to shake. Did we just do that? She asked. We did. I thought he'd fight, thought he'd make us kill him. His pride was hurt, but not enough to die over. Most men, when they really face death, choose to live. Kai put his arm around her shoulders. You were brave, braver than you needed to be. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. She leaned into him, and they stood like that while the sun climbed higher and the valley settled into silence around them. The cabin was still ruined, winter was still coming, and they still had to figure out how to survive the months ahead. But they'd faced down the men who hunted them, had claimed their right to choose their own lives. It was a start. Maybe it was enough. They stood in the clearing until the last echo of Barrow's retreat faded into the vastness of the mountains. Then Eliza turned to look at the burned cabin, at the charred timbers and collapsed walls that represented weeks of hope reduced to ash in a single night. "We can't rebuild it in time," she said, stating what they both knew. "Not before the snow comes." "No." Kai studied the ruins, calculating. "But we don't need a cabin. We need shelter. There's a difference." He walked to the eastern ridge where it curved to form a natural alcove, protected from the prevailing winds. The rock face rose 30 feet, creating an overhang that would shed rain and snow. Beneath it, the ground was dry, littered with pine needles and the scattered remains of some animal's den. "We build here," he said, gesturing to the space. "A dugout shelter, half underground, backed against the rock. The earth will insulate us, the overhang will protect us, and we can heat it with a fraction of the wood a cabin would need." Eliza walked the space, seeing what he described. "How long?" "A week if we work hard. Less if we're lucky." He looked at the sky, reading the weather. "We've got maybe 10 days before the first real snow. It'll be tight, but we can do it." They started that afternoon, working with the urgency of people racing against a deadline written in clouds and wind. Kai showed Eliza how to dig into the hillside, creating a space that would be warm and dry. They used stones from the ruined cabin's foundation to build a retaining wall, logs from the collapsed roof to frame the entrance, pine boughs and cedar bark for a roof that would shed water. The work was brutal, digging in rocky soil, hauling stones that left their hands bleeding, cutting timber until their arms shook with exhaustion. But they worked side by side, learning each other's rhythms, developing the wordless communication that comes when survival depends on cooperation. On the third day, while Eliza was gathering more cedar bark, she found the horses. Barrow's horses, the ones Kai had scattered, grazing in a meadow 2 ridges over. They'd been wandering, waiting for someone to claim them. She came back leading all 5, grinning despite her exhaustion. "Thought we could use these?" she said. Kai looked at the horses. Good stock, well fed, with saddles and tack still attached. "Barrow's going to have a long walk home." "Good. Let him walk. Let him think about what it costs to chase people who don't want to be caught." She tied the horses to a picket line. "Besides, we need them more than he does." By the end of the week, the shelter was finished. It wasn't beautiful, a low, earth-backed structure that looked more like an animal's burrow than human habitation. But it was solid, weather-tight, and when Kai built a fire in the small hearth they'd constructed, the heat filled the space and held, radiating from the stone walls. "It's perfect," Eliza said, sitting in the warmth after a day of cold rain. "I never thought I'd be so happy to live in a hole in the ground, but this is perfect. It'll get us through winter." Kai was already thinking ahead, planning. "But we need meat, lots of it, enough to last 4, maybe 5 months." The next 2 weeks they became hunters. Kai taught Eliza to track elk through the timber, to read their patterns and anticipate their movements. They killed 3, more meat than 2 people could eat fresh, but exactly what they needed for smoking and drying. They worked the carcasses with nothing wasted, rendering fat for candles and cooking, scraping hides for clothing and blankets, smoking strips of meat over low fires until it was preserved enough to last until spring. Eliza proved to have a talent for the work. Her hands, which had once struggled with rifle buttons, moved with confidence now, cutting clean, working leather, building smoke racks. She transformed from the desperate girl in the creek into someone competent and strong, someone who could look at a dead elk and see survival instead of just death. "You're good at this," Kai said one evening, watching her work a hide. "I'm good at staying alive," she replied. "Turns out that's a skill you can learn if the alternative is bad enough." By the time the first snow fell, they were ready. The shelter was stocked with smoked meat, dried berries, roots, and tubers they'd gathered from the valley. They had firewood stacked and covered, water from the creek that ran even in deep winter, and 5 horses that would provide emergency food if things got desperate enough. The snow came soft at first, just a dusting that melted by afternoon. Then heavier, until it lay thick on the ground and piled deep on the roof of their shelter. The world contracted to the space they could reach on snowshoes, to the warm darkness of their dugout, to the careful rationing of supplies and the long, quiet hours when there was nothing to do but talk. And they talked. About childhoods and losses, dreams and regrets. Eliza told him about her mother, who died when she was 12, leaving her alone with a father who'd loved whiskey more than his daughter, about sheep she'd named, about books she'd read by candlelight, about the moment she'd realized her father had sold her and decided she'd rather die than accept it. Kai told her about his grandfather, about lessons learned in a language most white people would never hear, about watching his people confined to land that couldn't sustain them, about the choice to leave everything familiar rather than die slowly in a place that called itself sanctuary but felt like a cage, about 3 years of solitude that had taught him to survive but not to live. "I thought being alone was the same as being free," he said one night, feeding sticks to the fire. "Thought if I needed no one could take anything from me." "Were you right?" Eliza asked from where she sat mending a shirt, her needle moving in and out of fabric with practiced ease. "I was safe. That's not the same as being right." He looked at her across the firelight. "You changed that. Changed what I thought I wanted, what I thought I needed." "I trapped you," she said with a sad smile. "Just not the way I planned." "You didn't trap me. You gave me a choice. Every morning I rode to that pasture. Every time I showed you how to shoot or track or survive, those were choices. I could have stayed away. I didn't." "Why not?" Kai thought about the real answer beneath the easy explanations. "Because you looked at me like I was a person, not a problem. Because you wanted to learn instead of be rescued. Because standing in that creek, shaking with cold, you were still choosing instead of surrendering." He met her eyes. "I'd spent 3 years invisible, and you saw me, really saw me. That's not something you walk away from." Eliza set down her mending, moved to sit beside him. The shelter was small enough that sitting close was practical, but this was different. This was deliberate. "Kai, what are we?" she asked quietly. "Partners? Friends? Something else?" "I don't know." "What do you want us to be?" "I want us to be people who chose each other. Not because of fear or need or survival, but because we make each other's lives better just by being in them." She took his hand. "Is that enough for you?" He pulled her close, kissed her with all the words he didn't have, all the feelings he'd been afraid to name. She kissed him back, fierce and certain, and when they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "It's enough," he said. "More than enough." They made love that night, slow and careful and tender, learning each other the way they'd learned the land, with patience and attention and reverence for what was being shared. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the warmth of blankets and firelight, and Eliza traced patterns on his chest with her finger. "I never thought I'd be happy in a hole in the ground in the middle of nowhere," she said. "But I am. With you, I am. Even knowing we might be stuck here all winter, that we could run out of food, that the cold could kill us, that we're completely alone. Especially knowing that, because it means every day we survive, we do it together. Every choice we make it for us, not for anyone else." She propped herself up to look at him. "That's what freedom feels like, isn't it? Not the absence of danger, but the presence of choice. You're wiser than you should be at your age." "I had a good teacher." Winter deepened around them. The snow fell heavy and stayed, piling against their shelter, until only the entrance showed, making the inside feel like a warm cave cut off from the frozen world outside. They fell into routines, checking the horses, gathering firewood from the stacks they'd made, cooking meals from their stores, maintaining weapons and tools against the day they'd need them again. One morning in deep winter, Eliza woke to find Kai already up, working on something by the fire. He hid it when she stirred, but not before she caught a glimpse. "What are you making?" she asked. "Nothing." "Liar, show me." He hesitated, then held out his hand. In his palm lay a ring carved from a piece of antler, simple and smooth and perfect. "I know we're not married," he said, the words coming awkward. "I know we haven't said vows or had a ceremony or any of the things people do. But I wanted you to have something that says you're not alone, that you chose and were chosen back." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. She took the ring, slipped it on her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Which it had. "I don't need paper or a preacher to know what we are," she said. "But I'll wear this. I'll wear it and remember that the best things in life aren't given, they're chosen." She kissed him, tasting salt from her own tears, and they held each other while the fire burned low and the wind sang through the valley outside their shelter. Winter finally broke in early spring. The snow melted in rushing streams, the valley turned green overnight, and animals emerged from wherever they'd sheltered to feast on new grass. Kai and Eliza emerged too, blinking in bright sunlight, amazed they'd survived. They'd lost weight, both of them gaunt from a winter on short rations. But they'd made it. Together, they'd made it. "What do we do now?" Eliza asked, standing in the meadow where wildflowers were already blooming. "We live," Kai said. "We plant a garden, hunt when we need to, build something more permanent for next winter. We make a life here." "What about Barrow? What about my father and the town and all the people who might still be looking for us?" "Barrow's had all winter to decide if you're worth chasing into these mountains. My guess is he's moved on, found some other girl to buy, some other property to claim." Kai looked at the valley, at the shelter that had kept them alive, at the horses grazing peacefully in the meadow. As for everyone else, let them wonder. Let them make up stories about what happened to Eliza Hart. We know the truth. That's enough. They spent the spring building, a real cabin this time, with proper walls and roof and windows made from oiled paper that let in light. A garden plot where they planted seeds Eliza had brought from her father's ranch, carrots, potatoes, beans. A corral for the horses, a smokehouse for meat, a root cellar for winter storage. It was hard work, but different from the desperate labor of racing against winter. This was building with time, with care, with the knowledge that they were creating something meant to last. One afternoon while they were working, a rider appeared at the valley's southern entrance. Both Kai and Eliza reached for rifles before they recognized Sam Yates on his old mule. "Easy," Sam called, his hands visible and empty. "I come in peace." They walked down to meet him, wary but not hostile. "Sam," Kai said, "long way to ride just to visit. Had to see for myself if the stories were true." Sam looked around the valley, at the cabin taking shape, at the garden growing green. "Word came back that Barrow's men ran into trouble in the high country, that his bride-to-be died in a fall, and the Apache who stole her disappeared into the mountains. Barrow himself confirmed it, said he'd seen the body." "Did he now?" Eliza said, very much alive. "He did, and then he left the territory entirely, sold his ranch, packed up, headed east, said these mountains had taken enough from him." Sam smiled. "Funny thing, though, his men told a different story in the saloon, said they'd been run off by ghosts, that the Apache could move like smoke, and the girl could shoot like the devil himself." "Stories," Kai said carefully. "Sure, stories." Sam reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a package wrapped in oilcloth. "Brought you some things: coffee, sugar, flour, ammunition. Figured you might need supplies." "We can't pay you," Eliza said. "Didn't ask you to. Consider it a gift from someone who's glad to see justice done, even if it's the rough kind." He handed over the package. "Your father's gone too, by the way. Drank himself to death 2 months back. The ranch sold for debts. There's nothing left there for you, even if you wanted to go back." Eliza absorbed this news with less emotion than she might have expected. Her father had been dead to her long before his body caught up with the fact. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "One more thing." Sam pulled out a folded paper. "This came through the land office. Someone filed a claim on this valley under the Homestead Act, claimed it was abandoned trapper territory, filed all the proper paperwork, paid all the fees. Says here the claim belongs to—" He squinted at the paper. "Eliza Redbird and her husband Kai. That wouldn't be you, would it?" Kai and Eliza exchanged glances. "How?" Kai asked. "I might have helped with the paperwork. Might have known a clerk who owed me a favor. Might have figured 2 people who worked this hard to be free deserved a piece of paper saying this land belongs to them and no one else can take it away." Sam folded the paper, handed it to Eliza. "It's legal and proper. This valley's yours now. Build your life here. Be happy." He tipped his hat and rode away before either of them could thank him properly, leaving them standing in the meadow holding a piece of paper that transformed them from fugitives into landowners, from runaways into homesteaders. "Eliza Redbird," she said, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." "You sure? Taking my name means you're stuck with me." "I've been stuck with you since the moment you decided not to marry me at the creek. Figured I might as well make it official." They built a fire that night, a big one in the open, no longer afraid of being seen. They roasted fresh meat and ate the bread Sam had brought, and when the stars came out, they lay on blankets in the grass and watched the sky wheel overhead. "Tell me a story," Eliza said, her head on Kai's shoulder. "What kind of story?" "The kind that has a happy ending. I could use one of those." So Kai told her about his grandfather's stories, about Coyote and Raven, and all the trickster tales that taught lessons wrapped in laughter. He told her about the morning star and the evening star, about the first people and how they learned to live with the land instead of against it. He told her stories until his voice grew rough, and she was nearly asleep, content and safe, in a way neither of them had been for longer than they could remember. Summer came full and green. The garden flourished, the horses grew fat on good grass, and the cabin stood complete and solid against the valley's eastern ridge. They worked during the day and loved during the night, and slowly the desperate edge of survival softened into something that looked almost like peace. One evening, standing by the creek where it pooled deep and clear, Eliza turned to Kai. "Do you remember what I said that first morning? That you'd seen me undressed so you had to marry me? I remember thinking you were either very brave or very desperate." "Both," she admitted. "But I was also very wrong. You didn't have to marry me. You didn't owe me anything. But you showed up anyway. Every morning you showed up." "Best decision I ever made. Even when Barrow was hunting us? Even when we were freezing in that shelter, rationing food, not sure we'd make it to spring. Especially then, because I wasn't alone, and neither were you." She slipped off the antler ring he'd made her, held it up to catch the last light. "This isn't enough anymore," she said. For a moment, Kai's heart stopped. Then she smiled. "I want the real thing. Not paper from a land office or stories we tell ourselves. I want to stand in front of you and say words that make it real, that make us real. There's no preacher for 100 miles. Don't need a preacher, just need you and me and the sky and the truth." She took his hand. "Kai Redbird, I choose you. I chose you in the creek when I tried to trap you into marriage. I chose you every morning you showed up to teach me. I chose you when we ran, when we hid, when we fought. And I choose you now, in this valley, on this land, under this sky. Will you choose me back?" Kai pulled her close, kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "Eliza Hart, I've been choosing you since the moment I saw you shaking in that creek, too stubborn to give up even when giving up would have been easier. I choose you now, and I'll choose you tomorrow, and every day after that until there are no more days left to choose." He slipped the ring back on her finger. "This is me choosing. This is me staying." They held each other as the sun set and the stars emerged, two people who'd found freedom not in solitude, but in partnership, not in running, but in standing their ground and building something worth keeping. The seasons turned. They survived their second winter easier than the first, prepared and practiced. Spring brought a foal from one of the mares, and Eliza laughed with delight watching it run on wobbling legs through the meadow. Summer brought travelers, trappers and prospectors passing through, and Kai and Eliza traded furs and smoked meat for supplies and news from the wider world. The news was always the same. Wars and politics, boomtowns and busted mines, people chasing wealth or running from trouble. It all seemed very far away from their valley, very distant from the life they'd built. One afternoon in their third autumn together, Eliza called Kai to the garden. She'd been working the soil, preparing it for winter, and she'd found something, a scatter of beads, green and blue and red, worked into patterns that spoke of the people who'd been here long before any white settlers arrived. "Your people?" she asked, holding them carefully. "Maybe. Or Ute, or Arapaho. This valley's been here longer than any of us. We're just the latest ones to call it home." He took a bead, rolled it between his fingers. "My grandfather would have said we're borrowing it, that the land owns us more than we own it. Then we'll be good borrowers. We'll care for it, protect it, pass it on someday to whoever comes next." She put the beads in her pocket. "But for now, it's ours. Our home. Our life. Our choice," Kai added. "Our choice," she agreed. They worked the garden together as the aspens turned gold and the first cold winds hinted at winter. When evening came, they returned to the cabin where a fire already burned in the hearth, where dried herbs hung from the rafters and shelves held the accumulated wealth of 3 years of survival: jars of preserves, smoked meat, tools and blankets, and all the small necessities that made a house into a home. That night, as they lay together in the bed they'd built from pine and stuffed with sweet grass, Eliza put Kai's hand on her belly. "There's going to be one more choosing," she said quietly. "Come spring." He understood immediately, his eyes going wide in the firelight. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Are you afraid?" He thought about it honestly. Terrified and grateful and amazed that we get to do this, build a life, raise a child, create something that goes on beyond us. It's a lot of responsibility. It is, but we've handled everything else that's come at us. We'll handle this too. He kissed her, gentle and reverent. Together. The baby came in late spring, a daughter with her mother's pale green eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Sarah, after Eliza's mother, and she was strong and healthy and utterly perfect in the way that all new parents believe their children to be. Kai held her that first night while Eliza slept, exhausted from labor, and marveled at the tiny person in his arms. This child would grow up free, would never know reservations or arranged marriages, would never have to choose between survival and dignity, because she'd be raised with both. "Your grandmothers would have loved you," he whispered to her. "Mine who taught me to survive, yours who taught your mother to be strong. They're gone now, but they're here too, in you, in this valley, in everything we've built." Sarah made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite contentment, and Kai walked with her through the cabin, showing her the home her parents had created through determination and love, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept the lives other people had planned for them. Years passed. Sarah grew into a child who could track deer through the timber, who could shoot straight, who spoke the Apache words her father taught her and tended the garden her mother had planted. Other families found the valley, people running from their own troubles, looking for their own freedom. And Kai and Eliza welcomed them, shared what they'd learned, helped them build shelters and plant crops, and survive their first winters. A small community grew, not a town exactly, but a collection of people who'd all chosen this hard life over easier alternatives. They helped each other, protected each other, built something that looked like the future instead of the past. On a summer evening when Sarah was 7, she came running to where Kai and Eliza sat watching the sunset. "Mama, Papa, there's people coming, a whole group of them." They stood, wary from old habit, but the people who emerged from the southern trail were clearly no threat. Families with children, elders, people who looked exhausted and hopeful in equal measure. The leader stepped forward, an older Apache woman who studied Kai with knowing eyes. "We heard there's a valley where people can live free," she said in the language of his childhood, "where Apache and white can build together, where the old ways and new ways make something better than either one alone. Is it true?" Kai looked at Eliza, at Sarah, at the cabin and garden and life they'd created. Looked at the other families who'd found refuge here. Looked at this group of weary travelers seeking the same thing he'd sought all those years ago. A place to belong. A chance to choose. "It's true," he said. "There's work to do, and winter's hard and nothing comes easy. But if you're willing to build instead of take, to share instead of hoard, to choose freedom over comfort, there's a place for you here." The woman smiled. "Then we've come to the right place." That night, the valley filled with fires and voices, with stories shared and plans made. Eliza stood with Kai watching it all, their daughter asleep against her shoulder. "We did this," she said softly. "Started with me standing in a creek trying to trap a stranger into marriage. And now look. You didn't trap me. You freed me." He pulled her close. "Freed both of us. Was it worth it? Everything we went through, everything we risked?" Kai looked at the valley full of people who'd chosen the hard path to freedom, at the daughter sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, at the woman who'd been brave enough to stake everything on a desperate gambit and wise enough to keep choosing courage even when it would have been easier to quit. "Every moment," he said, "every single moment was worth it." They stood together under the stars, two people who'd found that love wasn't about being claimed or rescued or owned. It was about choosing and being chosen back, about building something together that neither could have built alone, about standing firm against the world's attempts to trap them into lives they didn't want and insisting on the right to shape their own story. The creek ran silver in the moonlight, The same creek where it had all begun with a desperate girl and a wary man who'd both been running from different things. Now it ran through land they owned, through a valley they'd filled with life, through a future they were creating one choice at a time. And in the morning, they'd wake and make those choices again, to stay, to build, to love, to fight for the freedom they'd earned and the life they'd claimed. Because that's what freedom was, they'd learned. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of choice. Not being alone, but choosing your companions. Not escaping the world, but creating within it a space where you could be fully, completely, defiantly yourself. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.